Our next speaker for the evening, Mr. Ramakrishna Nishtala, who co-founded Vistaar Finance, which is primarily onto lending to micro and small enterprises in far-flung rural India. Prior to setting up this venture, he headed the microfinance business of FINTECH India and was a core member of the team which conceptualized, developed, and started the microfinance business from early 2008, where he was responsible for coordinating the rollout of FINTECH India's 800-branch network surrounding technology, people, and premises. Mr. Nishtala will be speaking on driving financial inclusion of MSMEs, leveraging fintech. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Mr. Ramakrishna Nishtala, Managing Director and CEO, Vistaar Finance.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a story which is set in India, in the state of Tamil Nadu, near a city called Salem. It's a story about a town called Edappadi. Edappadi is a town which I think if you were to ask the average Indian, on a bad day they may say it is in Sri Lanka, and on a good day they may perhaps recognize that it is in India and perhaps in Tamil Nadu. So it is very typical of the many, many towns of its kind which dot the Indian countryside, a population of around 54,000 at the last census. This is in Edappadi. This is a story of a micro enterprise customer called Ashok. Ashok runs a kirana store, a very classic kirana store, catering to about 3,000-4,000 families in the vicinity of the kirana store. He is a self-made man. He is somebody who started this store about 10 years ago and takes great pride in the fact that he built it up from scratch to the level that it has reached today. And being a typical middle-class man, he also takes a lot of pride in the fact that he sends his 2 children to the neighboring English medium school. So this is just to give you an idea of what's the profile of this customer. Ashok was also an ambitious man, and he felt that there is a possibility for him to grow his business whenever the opportunity arose. And so it did indeed arise, because the neighboring shop, which was just adjacent to his kirana store, actually came up for sale. And after some negotiations, he was able to strike a price of 8 lakhs to buy this adjacent shop. He looked at his savings and found that he could manage to generate about 3 lakhs from his internal savings. He asked around in his friends and family with no success for the balance 5 lakhs. He even approached a local moneylender, but the moneylender said that that quantum of money is something that he will find a little difficult to manage, and perhaps at best he can give him 1 lakh of rupees. So here was Ashok, a person who's already running a successful micro enterprise, catering to the real needs of the local economy, and with a business which is already generating cash flows, which is perhaps a little more than can be said about the many e-commerce companies which are, I think, dotting the Indian landscape today. So Ashok now needed a loan of 5 lakhs, for which he now had to decide what his next steps are. And for that, Ashok decided to approach a bank. He approached a bank is a simple statement to make. In reality, what he told us was his experience of approaching the bank was spread over many, many visits, spread over many, many weeks. And he was told that sometimes that the bank manager is busy because there is an audit going on. Sometimes he was told that the bank manager is busy because there is somebody who's come from the zonal office. And sometimes he was told that the bank manager is busy because somebody has come from the head office. And of course, sometimes he was told the bank manager is not there because the bank manager is on leave. So over a period of several weeks, Ashok made several rounds to the bank with no success in even talking to the branch manager. And at the end of these multiple visits, it happened that finally he managed to reach out to this gentleman. The conversation lasted all of 2 minutes. And the précis that you see here is a synopsis of the conversation. At the heart of the problem was, for the bank manager, everything started and ended with documents. So, sir, if you need a loan, can you please tell us, do you have an SSI registration or do you have any form of registration which will establish the fact that you are running a business? Which of course Ashok did not have. The next question which the bank manager had was to know if there are any documents that he has to establish the income and the cash flows of the business. But Ashok, like a classic micro enterprise customer, was somebody who dealt in the cash economy. And therefore, almost all his transactions were in cash, as a result of which he was not able to establish his cash flows to the bank manager. So in the eyes of the bank manager, there were three critical documents which would determine whether Ashok's case would move forward or not. Does he have an income tax return? No. Does he have an audited balance sheet? No. Does he at least have a bank statement which reflects all his cash flows, both income and expenses? No. And therefore, for the bank manager, it was a very clear case of seeing that large word that you see on the right-hand side and the bottom, which was the case was rejected. And Ashok didn't give up very easily because he said that perhaps this is one irate bank manager. Let me go and try a few others in the neighborhood. But he faced exactly the same response with many other bank managers that he had gone to. And that's when Ashok approached us. We are a non-banking finance company which focuses on lending to the micro enterprises of the country. In our mind, we were very clear that Ashok has records. And this is for the simple reason that Ashok is a businessman. And I'm sure that all of you will agree that we cannot conceive of a businessman who does not maintain records. Otherwise, how would he be in business? How would he know whether he's making money or not? So we asked Ashok, tell us, what are the kind of records you have? For instance, you would be purchasing from your suppliers. So do you maintain some records? And Ashok said, yes, of course I do. Because almost all my all my suppliers give me credit, which means that I have to keep track of the bills because I have to keep settling these bills periodically. So Ashok showed us very meticulously maintained purchase bills over the last 12 months. And then we asked Ashok, how do you keep track of your sales? And remember, Ashok was catering to the needs of about 3,000 families in the neighborhood, many of them salaried class people who actually settle bills with him in the first week of each month when they get their salaries. And then Ashok showed us very meticulous records again of all the sales that he does spread over the last 12 months. And of course, I think thanks to the government's great initiative, Ashok had no problem in establishing what his identity was because he had an Aadhaar card. So we were very excited with this, and we said, let's put all this into our lending algorithm. So we started with saying that, Mr. Ashok, if you can please stand up, let's take a look at your iris. We did an iris scan, and automatically into our system, we had auto-populated Ashok's identity in terms of who he was and his address, which is where he stays. Then we had to ascertain what were the revenues of Ashok, for which we went back to the 12 months of meticulous records that he had maintained. And with that, we were able to say what kind of revenues does he have on a monthly basis, on an annual basis. And our algorithm also permitted us to cross-verify this by looking at the stock. A typical Kirana store would have about 60 days of stock. So the revenue, we were able to cross-verify with the stock that Ashok had, and therefore we got a very good fix on what's the kind of revenue that he has on a monthly basis. And then we asked Ashok about his purchase bills, which he showed us. And again, based on the purchase bills, we knew what his material costs were. In addition, there were other expenses. For example, electricity cost, some labor cost, because he also had 2 helpers in the Kirana stores. All this put together told us what his expenses were. As a result of which, we were able to arrive at what the net business income that Ashok was generating. We also had standards that we had prepared earlier based on a detailed study of the sector, which told us, depending on the composition of sale of the Kirana store, what is the likely net business income for a level of revenue. And this was a means of our cross-verifying whatever we had ascertained through these calculations. But after this, then comes the other expenses, that there are household expenses. Remember that he had to pay for his children's school fee. There are expenses of food and so on and so forth. And then there are any other obligations that he may have. Just like many others in South India, Ashok was a huge fan of subscribing to the local chit fund. So we took that obligation also in. We checked to see whether by any chance he did have a credit record in the bureau, which in this case turned out to be not there. As a result of all this, we arrived at what is the monthly surplus that Ashok generates. And our next question to him was, if this is a surplus that you're generating month on month over the last 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then what have you done with this? And then Ashok explained to us about how he had constructed the first floor of his house, how he had purchased gold, and all the assets that he had created, which were a means of cross-verification of the authenticity of the calculations that we had done. We put all this into a program and came out with a decision that we could indeed lend 5 lakhs to Ashok. Interestingly, post-demonetization, Ashok was also able to tell us that he's planning a few more changes which would make the whole process stronger. And I would mention 2 of them here. The first is that he said he's now planning to get a small electronic register in which he would be able to capture all the sales that's happening, which would replace the sales notebook that he was maintaining earlier, which was a great thing because I could just use the electronic register, look at the past 12 months of track record, and that would tell me what the sales that he's actually doing are. And also, because now there was a greater thrust towards making payments electronically, he said at least for a part of his vendors, he was starting to pay them through payment wallets, which also meant I could cross-verify what his purchases were. So this further reinforced the entire credit underwriting process. Being a company which has been in the space for a while, we also had created a database of Kirana shops across the country in the 205 locations that we operate. And that was desegregated down to a state level, a cluster level, and eventually at the branch level. And when we put our 5 lakhs credit lending decision through this system, it gave us a few prompts and suggested that perhaps the margin that we have taken for this customer is a little on the higher side compared to industry standard. And the purchase from a particular supplier seems to be a little excessive, so it could be moderated. And the good side was, it also told us that across the country, for the 80,000 customers that we had, Kirana stores were right on top in terms of the repayment behavior of the customer. The delinquencies were the least. And the output was that we could actually lend 4 lakhs to Ashok. And so we then disbursed the money through the bank, and we also set up a repayment mechanism through the bank so that every month an equated monthly installment would come back to us. Why was this necessary? And it was necessary to do this through the bank and not through a cash system, was because we wanted to induct Ashok into the mainstream of finance so that he starts to get familiar with using the banking system for transactions, and more importantly, also create a future credit history so that we will be able to migrate him through the system and then move him upwards into the kind of institutions that he would have to deal with. And so Ashok went ahead and purchased the purchased the shop which was adjacent to his current shop. He got his daughter, who had passed out of college, to run the shop. And he told us that his dream is that in 4 years' time, he plans to expand the shop further, employ another 10 people, and become the best shop in Edapadi. And his dream didn't stop there. He said a further 3 years hence, he wanted to expand to a chain of Kirana stores across Edapadi, Bhavani, Perundurai, and Ilampillai, which For those of you who may not be familiar with these names, they're all small towns like Edapadi, which dot the countryside there. So this was a path on which he had a dream of actually embarking. The starting point for which was he needed to get that loan of 4 to 5 lakhs. And indeed, all this was made possible because there is today a very enabling ecosystem. And I don't think I will dwell on this too much. Suffice to say that because of the Jan Dhan Yojana, there are as many as 27 crore bank accounts that have been opened up. Therefore, for a person like Ashok with a limited banking history also, or with no bank account perhaps, it is possible now for a bank account to be opened up and for transactions to happen through the bank account. The Aadhaar removed one of the biggest troubles which was there relating to KYC earlier, where now we are able to take the KYC document, the Know Your Customer document in the form of Aadhaar, and establish his identity and establish his place of residence. And Ashok's smartphone was also going to be a huge mechanism for him to start to become even more efficient in his operations, because he could now pay his suppliers through the payment wallet. He could also fund his bank account and make sure that the EMI that he needed to pay us was something that he could actually do sitting right there. So this was the enabling ecosystem which made the entire transition for Ashok that much simpler. Some of you might be wondering that here is a conference on FinTech EDGE. We have had some stunning numbers quoted by the lady who spoke earlier, Sirisha. She talked of many, I wasn't sure if it was billions of dollars or trillions of dollars. Suffice to say it was one hell of a lot of money. And so you might be wondering, where does Ashok fit into this whole story? Ashok fits in because he is not alone. And there are many, many, many others like him. In the country, as per the estimates of the Ministry of MSME, there are 45.3 million MSMEs. And the word MSME refers to micro, small, and medium enterprises. There is a lot of emphasis that is placed on the SME part, which is the small, medium enterprises part. But if you look at the size and the distribution, as many as 41.6 million of them are micro enterprises, and they are the financially excluded lot as per the ministry's own statistics. So ladies and gentlemen, I would suggest you should ponder on that number, 41.6 million. A lot of discussions are about the balance, 4 million, but really, in terms of sheer size, we have as many as 41.6 million who are today languishing in the absence of access to credit, in the absence of access to many products in financial inclusion, which all of us take for granted. And if we were to say that each one of these, if given access to credit, were to create 2 jobs, which is not unusual. Remember in the Ashok example, he was talking of buying the adjacent shop and creating 2-3 more jobs, and that's extremely common when you lend to micro enterprises. So if we were to take that every one of those 41.6 million were to have 2 jobs created, then we are talking of 82 million. In a period where there is a whole lot of discussion about that the economy is growing at over 7%, but where are the jobs? And the Indian youth who are passing out in large numbers every year are suffering from the lack of jobs. So here is a golden opportunity where as many as 82 million jobs can get created, only if you're able to provide full access, financial access to these people. And the best part of this is that if you were to see the distribution, the preponderance of these 82 million jobs are in rural areas. They are away from the very large cities of Bengaluru, Chennai, and so on and so forth. They are in small towns which are variants of the town of Edapadi. And therefore, there are also many other concomitant benefits, including lessening migration and perhaps lessening the traffic in Bangalore and making it possible for us to reach here in 20 minutes instead of the 2 hours, which I'm sure many of you took to reach here. So these are the other attendant benefits of providing access to this 41.6 million. So in the path to financial inclusion, lending is just the first step. It's a very important step because it's a very viable step. It generates revenues. There is a direct impact in terms of the revenue that the micro enterprise is able to generate, and therefore it takes it further and further more on the path of economic prosperity. And of course, then it gets followed up by payments. Then there are investments. People have talked of mutual funds, insurance, and so on. But all of it, starting with the journey of lending, eventually reaching to a stage of prosperity for the micro enterprise, reaching a stage of a higher standard of living for the micro enterprise. If I were to see how does this fit into a financial metrics, we have the financially included and the financially excluded, and there is a rural and an urban split. Some of you may be wondering that there are now many websites, many companies, and Manavjit, no offense to your company, I think they're doing great yeoman service in terms of catering to this segment of the population. Why I'm saying so is because if you were to go into any of these websites and actually do a click, what you would discover is that very early on in the process, there would be one icon which will pop up and say, please upload your documents. So in a sense, we are back to the old document problem for the micro enterprise. Is that a problem for the salaried class guy? No. Is that a problem for the SME? No. But is that a problem for the micro enterprise? Yes. Because this gentleman, again, lacks an income tax return, he lacks an audited balance sheet, and he lacks a bank statement. And so he's, in a sense, back to square one. And there are, of course, in a lighter vein, other companies which I believe are emerging, which are saying that depending on the social media activity of the individual, we will be able to come up with some credit lending algorithm. I must confess, though, my experience in financial services now for about a decade has still not made me understand how somebody taking a picture in front of the Taj Mahal and posting it on a Facebook would give you huge information into the lending decision. It does tell you two things, that one, he went to Agra, and two, he took a picture in front of the Taj Mahal. I'm not sure how much more information it gives you for the lending decision, but perhaps that's a discussion for some other time. So the websites and the companies and the startups which are focusing on financial included are doing great work, but it still leaves the other 92% excluded. And I would venture to suggest that if India is truly to become a great nation, it's to truly become a nation where financial inclusion is all encompassing, all embracing, then it needs to encompass 100% of the micro enterprises and small and medium enterprises that you see on this chart. I would perhaps correct myself to suggest that it's even more important to see that this 92% is definitely financially included. And is it possible to lend to them? Yes, of course. It is possible to lend to them, as this example has shown us. It's just that you need to use different tools, you need to use different technologies, you need to use different lending algorithms, and use them with innovation, with commitment, and with consistency. And if we do that, I have absolutely no doubt that we can profitably lend even to that 92%. So I would actually urge that the community must look at not just SME, but it should also look at the first M, which is the micro enterprises, so that we are able to lend to more Ashoks. We are able to lend to millions of Ashoks, and in the process, set India on the high road to development, growth, and prosperity. Thank you.